Hey everyone, welcome to a special edition of the Senstennial where we're talking about the latest and greatest trade rumors in the NHL. And today we're talking about the one and only Matt Dumba. So it's recently noted by Darren Drager that the Senators had kicked tires on Matt Dumba. He is a right-handed defenseman currently playing for the Minnesota Wild. I think he has a lot of name recognition. He used to be quite a productive top four defenseman. His production has fallen off a little bit. He's 28 years old. He's a pending UFA. But yeah, we're just here to talk about maybe why the Senators were kicking tires on Matt Dumba and whether we think he would be a good fit for the Ottawa Senators or not. So I'll flip it over to other Matt and give us your thoughts on Matt Dumba and Ottawa's interest in him.
I think he sort of fits the mold that the Senators are looking for. Reading some of the stuff that Minnesota Wild fans have to say, though, it sort of looks like the buck has passed him in terms of, guys like Kalen Addison have already surpassed him in skill level, so to speak. And that's fair. I mean, the Wild have a pretty solid decor as we touched on in our latest podcast. They have a solid decor where Ottawa is definitely lacking. And I think with Dumba, it really only comes down to price. It sounds like it's definitely higher, considering the Wild are a playoff team, as they should be, and as the price should be. You don't want to offload one of your core pieces mid-season for nothing. Um, so I think if it's a third and a B prospect like Sokolov or your Venti, then that's definitely something to consider. But if the price is a little too high, he's a guy that's definitely going to be going to UFA. It makes sense that he will be. They're cap strapped as it is, and from what I've read, the fans just want to move on from him. The game sort of passed him by there, and there's a lot of frustration. And I don't know if I want to touch that, even if we're as starved for a right hand D as we are. But odds are he's much better than Nick Holden. He's much better than Travis Hamonic. But how much better and how much would that cost?
How much better is an interesting question because I myself am just looking this up because I had the same thought of even, well, it might be worth kicking tires. He can't be worse than a Hamonic. Hamonic's even strength Corsi is 44.8 so far this season, and Matthew Dumba's is 45.8. So they are both subpar defensive players at 5-on-5. Not massively, but Hamonic, it's not massive on Hamonic's record, and yet it's massive in real life when you watch him play. So small swings in the percentage of a player's Corsi can have massive swings in their performance on the ice when you're dealing with such elite levels and such fine margins. So yeah, I mean, coming into this episode, I was prepared to say that Matthew Dumba, could do a job on the Sens right hand side, and I still possibly believe that, but I think the price would really have to determine it because we're getting a rental player who has not been playing especially well this season. His play has dropped off in terms of his offensive production, and his defensive numbers have not been great. And while I think that there's something to be said that in a more sheltered role, he could have some success here, isn't that probably what we said when we traded for Hamonic, and that hasn't worked out either? Sure, like neither of those guys need to be the guy. We have Shabbat, we have Sanderson. Those are the guys on the Sens back end, but it's really, really important that they're not a drag on a guy like Sanderson or Shabbat, because then you're nullifying one of the fair strengths that we have on the back end. And so I'm not necessarily sure this would be the move.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you there. I mean, if you had told me a couple years ago that Minnesota was looking to move on from Matt Dumba, I would have been right there saying, yeah, I think Ottawa should be in on him. I think, however, this season we've really seen his play fall off. And even towards the end of last season, I know Minnesota Wild fans were kind of like, yeah, we want Matt Dumba moved. Defensively, he would be an upgrade over Hamonic. However, offensively, he really hasn't been producing this season. And that's kind of what has been his bread and butter, I'd say, is both his offensive game and his physical game. But if he's not bringing you both of those, then what's the point in giving up potentially like a first round pick? And I say a first round pick because, as we know, last year, Ben Sherratt went for a first round pick. And I would say that he is not as good of a defenseman as Matt Dumba, or at least his pedigree is lesser than Matt Dumba's. And still he managed to get a first round pick off of Florida. My God, they probably regret that trade. But anyway, I do like that Matt Dumba is a member of the Hockey Diversity Alliance. I think that's really great. I think off ice, he would be a great character for the locker room. But as I'm sure everyone watching knows, over the last few years, there's been too many of those moves where Dorion has traded for guys who were high character guys, as he likes to put it. And that doesn't do anything for you on the ice. And obviously, I don't want the Sens trading for some total dink who doesn't fit into the locker room. But I think you need to find that balance between someone who is a good player and also is a good personality to complement the locker room. Mm-hmm. And I guess the final point on this that I'll make, barring any thoughts from you guys, is I think there are other defensemen out in the market that aren't right-handed shots that the Sens should be pursuing with maybe not more urgency, but definitely with continued interest, we'll say. And I know many people are like, well, we need a right-handed shot. Listen, DJ Smith went to the school of Mike Babcock. Mike Babcock loved having 3 left-handed defensemen and 3 right-handed defensemen and playing them on those respective sides. We shouldn't expect DJ Smith to necessarily be the coach who's going to be with the team in a couple of years from now, or even maybe next year, depending on what new ownership decides. The Sens should be trying to acquire the best defenseman possible for the most reasonable price. If that's Jake Chychrun, you try and trade for Jake Chychrun, who's on an excellent contract, gives you great value, and you'll figure out defensive positions later. Or Ivan Provorov, who's also been noted as potentially being on the market. He's a guy who's had a drop in production, but is only 25, has a lot of upside. He's another guy.
Playing on Philly.
Yeah, playing on Philly. And I mean, hey, imagine him with Zub, the Russian connection there. I mean, they could speak Russian on the ice. I'm sure their communication would be pretty good. But anyway, I'm rambling on here. And Ben, I know you want to make another point, so I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there, Matt, I believe, in that, we shouldn't necessarily get too hung up on the idea of a right-handed D. Listen, like, good players make your team better, and a hot take, bad players don't make your team better. And having good players that you can move around from one side to the other and give you strength throughout your lineup on either wing, on either side of the D, is good. And generally speaking, unless if it's like you're trading for like an elite player that you need to make sure that you get absolute maximum potential out of their tenure with your team, as long as they can do a good enough job in the role that you want them to play, even if it's on technically their offside, it's probably a worthwhile move. And I think that getting extremely hung up on the idea of them needing to play on the right is, I agree, I think possibly misleading. And especially because this was the main point I wanted to make. I think that it's a really rough market for defensemen right now. For whatever reason, maybe just like there's a glut of guys who are on long-term contracts and who aren't really on the market, meaning that the few guys that are getting moved are going for more. Like you said, a first for Sherratt is an overpayment. We all know that, and we want to avoid making a similar mistake. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't think we should do anything. I think it's a risk worth taking, but I would rather take a risk on a player who's good than take a risk on a player who fits the particular mold that we're looking for them to fill, which maybe isn't quite what I'm trying to say. It is, prioritize getting players that are good. And, if we have to shoehorn them into a position that maybe they wouldn't hold on paper, but it makes the team better, then do it. And don't worry about the technical, whether that's technically the side they're supposed to play on or not.
Yeah, these guys are NHL players. They're playing in the best league in the world. I'm sure that when you go into the best league in the world and then take players who are some of the best in their position and say, hey, can you try playing on your opposite side? They're not going to be like, oh, man, if I do that, I'm going to be the worst player ever. No, the players adapt. So I think that has to be taken into account. Anyway, on that note, thanks everybody for tuning in on this short little video on Matt Dumba and more of Ottawa's search for a defenseman in general. I really appreciate it. You can find us on Twitter at Senstennial and on Instagram and Reddit at the Senstennial. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next one. See ya.
Later.
Go Sens, go.